Hey everyone, this is Mike, and today I'm going to be talking about effective instruction in the social sciences. Burke talks about elements of effective instruction, and one of the key elements would be through differentiation. So that's one of his key instructional strategies. Um, Here I quoted one of the parts that I thought was pretty interesting. The way he phrased it was students should be able to enter a house through the front door. Those who can't need alternate entry points, which allow them to use what they know uh, to learn what they don't. So he uses an analogy of a house, and if certain students can't get in through the front door, then we have to give them access through different parts. That way they can reach the same level, meaning enter the house, but through different means. So let's go over some of the strategies where this is possible for students. How to play to our students' strengths. Berg talks about using things like analogies, so making comparisons to daily life. And I think that's very crucial when you're teaching history, for instance, where if you want a lesson to be meaningful and to connect with students, you have to make it relevant. So you can talk about daily life during the Civil War, for instance, and maybe zero in on um, a young soldier who was around the same age that the students are. That way they can kind of like relate to the character and to see historical perspective in a new light. Another way to play to your student strengths would be through visual explanations. So obviously you can have images, you can have videos, things to just change it up. Especially in my class, it's a block period, so we have to keep doing different things constantly. Otherwise, the kids get bored and they start fidgeting around. Um, Dramatic interpretations, so you can have big projects like role playing. Essential questions sort of tie everything together, so that's pretty useful as well. Hands-on manipulatives and techniques, so you can make them build something like a model of maybe a famous battle or a building. That's pretty good for visual learners and ELs. um, Making inductions, deductions, and drawing conclusions. And that forces students to analyze documents and not just see history as a mere matter of facts and dates, but really thinking about things like Lincoln's choices, why he didn't immediately free the slaves from the start. So we go into more nuanced points and draw on their opinions and just really go into analysis. So those are some pretty good ways of diversifying your instruction when it comes to a history class. Um, One of the key ways would also be demonstrating. So you show students what a successful performance looks like. So we're going to go into it a little bit later, but modeling is key, especially if you're having students citing sources, quoting. It's always good to have sentence starters or just model it in front of the board or projector. That way, if students need to refresh their memory or if they've never seen anything like that before, you just leave it up there um, throughout the instructional period, and students can just reference back to it and just, it serves as a visual aid or scaffold. Reading to think, you introduce a subject and get students to think from different perspectives. So you got to give students a purpose for reading. You can't just give them a graphic organizer or reading, say, hey, read this, now write about it. You have to tell them what they're looking for. Um, so, write to learn, that's kind of like an informal writing to see what they know. Formal writing would be to assess what they've learned. So, informally, you can have an essential question on the board and just ask them their opinion or to take a guess. And after you've given the instruction, you can have a formal assessment about what they've actually learned so you can measure it. Also discussions, pair shares, group discussions are helpful. And finally, reflections. So students have to reflect on the learning process and be able to communicate what they've come away with. Grouping is a big element, especially in my class. We have students either they group up into pairs or they sit in groups of four. So a lot of the activities are group based. Students are able to practice what they're saying to each other before they share out. They each evaluate their own work. Um, we have mixed abilities, so depending on the student's needs, if they're ELs, if they have IEPs, they're paired strategically. So as it says here, it shows the greatest instructional gains when you have mixed abilities. Formal and informal grouping. So again, like I said, pair share, specific group members do certain tasks. So if you have a poster presentation, you can divide it by, or the students can divide it themselves between the more artistically inclined or visual learners can take care of the artwork. Accelerator learners can probably do research or presentations. It just really depends on who's um, playing on the student's strengths. But either way, you're getting them to contribute, you're holding them accountable for a certain piece of the product, and ultimately they're all going to come away learning the same thing. Um, yeah, so pairs are just for like quick conversations, turn to your neighbor, your elbow buddy, so on and so forth. Demonstrating, like I mentioned earlier, modeling is a key factor for teaching. So before you do anything, you have to uh, model it to the students. Even if it's just instructions, you have to go over it step by step, stop, pause, explain what your instruction means, what you want it to look like, fill in like an answer or two. That way students have that reference point and are able to just follow the lesson, and in case they get stuck, like I mentioned earlier, they can always refer to the board. Um, so before you model what it looks like, during you clarify and help students. So when you have the students actually practicing what you taught them, you just go around the class and ask clarifying questions and look for understanding essentially. So after, um, have students reflect on what they can improve on. That's one of the things Burke says, where you're not only giving them an assignment, but you can actually get them to write about what they learned or maybe what was difficult to really get them to think about how they can improve. And also it gives you an idea of like where you went wrong, something you can kind of do better. Sentence starters are also a good way to get conversations going. If you have like a Socratic seminar and they need to practice academic language, especially they if they want to disagree, they can say, I disagree with you. I'm not necessarily on board with what you're saying, as opposed to that's dumb, that's stupid, which it's pretty common in my middle school. So having those sentence starters to really uh, let students refer to and just practice that language is pretty important. Background knowledge, so that's another thing that we can assess. So by having them write what they know, pre-writing a question prompt, you can sort of understand where students are and kind of build your lesson around that. Um, Providing direct instruction, demonstrate the meaning of words to promote academic language, like I referred to before. And then Burke talks about going beyond the textbook. So you have students delve deeper by looking up information in websites. I have a little sample here, like Facing History is a good site that I've used. And you can also show them images. So you just kind of add layers um, into what they're just reading on their worksheets or their textbooks. It just kind of sort of drives the message home, so to speak. So when introducing key ideas or terms, you first discuss, then post the terms on the wall for later reference. Teach students how to think, learn, and remember. According to Burke, effective teachers help all students identify and develop their individual talents and to promote on and to improve on the talents they lack. So we want students to understand what their where they stand academically, but we also want to give them the tools to sort of go beyond that and to um, give them those stepping stones to reach higher levels eventually. So teach students key habits of mind, such as gathering and evaluating information from multiple places, such as websites, articles, etc. So this is one of the things that we have students do as well in my class, um, giving them links and terminology, definitions, and just kind of getting them accustomed to really looking up information and putting it on paper so they can prove their claims. Um, so you provide students with time to grapple with ideas, which is pretty important. You can't just spoon feed them information, otherwise they won't get anything out of it. So think about how, why they came to their conclusions, and just ask them follow-up questions to inspire further analysis. So moving forward, oh yeah, respond critically to what they have read or viewed. Um, One of the things that we had them do was analyze images, and they have this graphic organizer that tells them to really think about who the target audience is, what the artist is trying to communicate, and just break it down piece by piece. And that way, instead of just saying, "Oh, I see an image of a field worker," they can really deconstruct it and analyze it further. So it really just helps them develop those habits of mind to become more critical thinkers, especially in history. Um, Assess understanding and use the results to improve your teaching. So Burke is firm in saying that assessment is not grading. So you can assess students in multiple ways, and it doesn't mean that you necessarily have to give them a grade. It doesn't have to be a test or an exam. Um, Effective instruction uses assessment to clarify what should be taught to determine how much progress your students have made, and to show how you can use this information to improve your instruction. So that's pretty fundamental. You have to assess your students to really see what they're grasping and where you're falling behind. Um, and I've sat in a couple of PLC meetings at my school, and these are some of the things that the teachers talk about when they go over, for instance, exams, and say, "Hey, like all of our kids, or 60% of our kids, didn't answer this question right. Well, what is going on here?" Even the accelerated ones like struggled. So that's one of the things where you just assess and kind of can tailor questions or tweak them just to see how we can better explain them, the ways we can improve as teachers. Assessment should be used to help both students and teachers learn um, observing. So you give students an assignment to see where they are, as I mentioned earlier. And KWL graphic organizers are pretty helpful. I liked how Burke kind of had a chapter on this or a page on it. So you ask students to explain what they already know, what they want to know, and what they learned by the end of the assignment. So it just kind of gets students to analyze their progress. And types of assessments, we have diagnostic, which is done before you begin to actively teach, so it lets you know where to start. Formative is used during the instructional sequence. So formative assessment is an ongoing measure of students' progress. So you can periodically assess them um, with quick write-ups or just like checks for understanding. And summative, of course, is going to be after everything is said and done. And differentiation, as I already talked about, different ways of just grouping your students based on their strengths, video, audio, text. You provide scaffolds and sentence starters, graphic organizers. Choice is also a good one, variety of topics. And that's about it. Thank you.